I was blessed with 5 children, 2 girls and 3 boys. All of my children had odd experiences, but my middle son was the first to have a sighting. Matthew passed away 3 years ago due to I'm sorry, I'm having trouble pronouncing this. Metastatic lung cancer. I think that's right. He turned 49 on June 20 and left us 32 days later. Ma'am, I'm very sorry to read this. This breaks my heart. My kids are approaching 40, and I just can't imagine. Anyway, let's move on. Matthew was 5 or 6 around 1973 or 1974. And back then, kids had a lot more freedom than they do today. They went outside to play in the morning, and they didn't come home until they got hungry or their moms blew the whistle or yelled for them. That's how it was in rural southern Maryland where we lived. It was around the time that Matthew had discovered his love for huckleberries. He would go into the woods and pick the berries rather than come home for lunch. All the kids played near the woods or maybe a dozen yards or so inside the tree line, but to get to the huckleberries, Matt had to go a little deeper than that. One day he was picking away and eating berries by the handful when he began to feel like someone was watching him. There wasn't anyone else around that he knew of, but the feeling was so strong that it made him nervous. After a few minutes, he decided he didn't want to be there anymore, and he came to the house and he told me about it. I didn't want to dismiss my son's concerns out of hand, but I did want to reassure him. Matthew wasn't prone to telling stories or exaggerating, and even at his young age, he was level-headed. If he said he felt like he was being watched, then he felt like he was being watched, and I told him that it was probably because he had gone into a part of the woods where the shadows were a little darker than they are on the edge. That could make things feel scarier for anyone. And then I told him that he did the right thing by coming and telling me, and to be careful in the future. The next day, Matthew avoided the woods, but little boys are what they are, and curiosity got the better of him by the following day. He had to know who was out there, and if they were still there, or if they had moved on. At 3 o'clock, he headed out to the woods to find the answers to these questions. I suggested that he should wait until the next day and leave earlier. The sun was low enough in the sky to cast long shadows. In the deeper woods, it would be even darker, and the shadows there would feel even more menacing. "No, Mom," he insisted. "I want to go now." I decided the best thing that I could do was to sit on the balcony and drink my coffee so I could keep an ear out for him. It was over half an hour later when he came back out of the woods with a pail full of berries. "Well, how'd it go?" I asked. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, but there's somebody out there, and they need a bath really bad, Mom." I thought, oh, good Lord, there's a bum out there and he could have hurt my boy. I know the word bum isn't politically correct today, but we didn't call them homeless people back then. We called them bums. I was worried and afraid, really. I didn't know what kind of person was living in those woods. I didn't know if they were dangerous, and I didn't want my son going back there where he could be hurt. I told him to stay away from the woods for a while, and whoever was out there would surely move on eventually, and I would check it out before I allowed him to go back. The next week, Matthew asked if he could go pick more berries, so I said I would go with him to make sure the stinky guy was gone. We went out to the berry patch, and Matt started filling his bucket. I took a good look around, and then I hung out for a bit to make sure that no one showed up. Once I was satisfied that my son would be safe, I headed back to the house. At the time, I had a 6-month-old who was taking a nap under a watchful eye of my 12-year-old. I had barely reached the porch when Matt came running out of the woods, sobbing and crying. Every horrible thing in the world went through my mind, and I ran to my child and I swept him up in my arms. Immediately, I noticed that he smelled like he had rolled in garbage. I cradled his frightened little face in my hands and I asked, "What happened?" "It was the hairy man," he hiccuped through his tears. It's okay, calm down," I said soothingly. "What hairy man are you talking about?" "He came out from behind a big tree," Matt cried, "and he grunted at me. Doing his best to fight the hysteria that was welling up inside him, my son went on to tell that the man reached out to take his bucket away. He said the man was covered in hair, but he didn't have a real face. It was covered in reddish-brown hair like mine. I had auburn hair at the time. Only this man's hair was all over him. He said the man was big and that he smelled so bad that it made him gag. Horrified, I decided I needed to go see this man for myself. Matt flew into a panic and he begged me not to go. He growls and hoots like an animal, Mom. He's not human. Another flood of tears took his breath away, and he had to steady himself for a second before he added, Mom, he's a monster. He's a man, but he's a monster man. Matthew was so hysterical that I couldn't go into the woods. It would have been too hard on my son. So instead, I waited for my husband to come home, and I told him about it. He and our neighbor went to check for a bum who was scaring our children, and they searched the whole area and discovered bare footprints that were 18 inches long and 7 to 8 inches wide, but they didn't find the hairy man. They followed the prints for 50 feet until they disappeared at the base of a large tree. And other than a few freshly broken branches, they didn't see any other signs of him. They said the whole area smelled like rotten meat, which they attributed to the remains of a dog they found 25 feet from where Matthew had been picking berries. The dog had no midsection and no front legs. My husband said it looked like it had been chewed off. After that, none of the children in our neighborhood were allowed in the woods, but several other children backed up Matthew's description of this thing. And for as long as we lived there, the parents in the area stood watch over the kids when they played outside. Was it Bigfoot? We'll never know for sure. You're welcome to form your own opinion. We had never heard of Bigfoot or Sasquatch at that time, so it wasn't something any of us would have made up. A year after all that happened, my uncle and my cousin had a visit from something for 3 nights in a row. It banged on the door as it walked through the wraparound porch. But that is a story for another time. Oh, that's a good story. It's a scary story. It's kind of a spooky story, especially for the kids. I'm very sorry you lost Matthew. That's the saddest part of this story, and I hate it. I kind of dwelled on that, but anyway, it's just kind of sad. But I'm glad that you shared this memory of Matthew with us. We all enjoyed it. So thank you, man, for sending the story. All right, you guys are going to like this story. This is pretty good. I actually think this is fiction. So I'm warning you now, but it's really a good story, so y'all hang in there and listen to this one. Secha Hollow State Park runs along the eastern slope of the Catal des Prairies. There's some names in here I'm not going to be able to pronounce, so y'all just hang with me. That land, along with the Cantu Hills that run from the northern border of South Dakota east to Minnesota and Iowa, was all formed by glaciers during the last ice age. It's a beautiful and mystical land full of legends and mysteries. Sechahala Creek that runs through the park is one of the few places in South Dakota that can still support trout, which makes it very unique. But what makes it even more so is the red glow that appears to come from it at night. The glow has led many to believe that the hollow is haunted, and maybe it is. Secha is a Sioux word for bad or evil, and there have been many strange and tragic events over the years there. Back in the 1970s, several people went missing in the hollow under dubious circumstances. Most people will tell you that a murderer was on the loose, actually a serial killer. But the locals believe it was something else, something unknown. The natives from the Sisseton Wahpeton Reservation to this day swear it was the big elder brother or the Chihatanka that caused those disappearances. Every year I spend my rifle deer season sitting in or stalking the ravines of the hollow in search of a monster buck. The older seasoned bucks know to stay hidden during that time. Once the duck season begins and the sounds of the shotguns ring through the hollow, those bucks slip even deeper into the wilderness. It's how they got to be monster bucks. and only the most patient and dedicated hunters can find them. Although it takes a lot of time to properly scout the ravines, determine the buck's habits, and find the best location to intercept their moves, it is good therapy to be out there where it is peaceful. My mind is alert, but the normal stresses of life are miles away. There have been rare occasions when I've had the feeling of being watched, and that feeling of peace was overshadowed by an eerie silence. But I had always assumed it was a deer watching me, or maybe even a mountain lion. On 2 separate occasions, I found mountain lion tracks following my path in the snow. Now that makes a man feel vulnerable to realize that he has been stalked by a predator. It is on those occasions that I began to think that perhaps there is something to those legends and superstitions. This year there was a tragedy in the area. The 17-year-old son of one of our neighbors to the south was out bow hunting and he didn't return. His bow and phone were found at the base of his deer stand, and his quiver was missing 1 arrow. My family and I participated in the search, and for 3 days we were out from 7 a.m. until dark. And since I know the area so well, I even offered to continue looking during the night. The sheriff seemed interested, but the man in charge of the search said no. My father and I went to the location where the bow was found on the 2nd day. We found a trackway of disturbed grass and undergrowth along with 3 blood spots before we lost the trail. There was no snow on the ground, so it was difficult to find any major detail in the tracks, but they looked much larger than my father's footprints. He wears a size 14 boot, so we knew that whoever caused the boy's disappearance was big. We staked and photographed and marked the location of the blood specimens and brought it back to the sheriff. A man dressed in slacks and a thin wool dress coat took the samples from him. I assumed the strangely dressed men were part of the Department of Criminal Investigations or some other government law enforcement agency. Their stylish clothes were not meant for the rugged terrain or the bitter cold of the upper Midwestern winters. On the 3rd day, one of the searchers came across a grisly scene of murder 4 miles to the north in one of the neighboring draws along the creek. The poor boy's remains were a sad sight. He was apparently torn apart and then partially eaten. The authorities assumed that scavengers had gotten to the boy after he was murdered. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance and death were strange, but the sheriff called an abrupt halt to the investigation and officially declared that a large man had abducted and murdered the boy 4 miles north of the abduction site. That was the day before rifle season. I didn't let the 3 days of searching for the boy keep me from my hunting therapy. I set out to hike to my spot in the hollow at 5 a.m. A fresh blanket of snow fell the night before, perfect for an opening morning in the hollow. It takes me some time to bushwhack into my favorite areas to hunt, and I take my time and try not to make a racket so I don't spook the deer. And on this morning, I went to a stand that I had set up 2 weeks before. I walked in north of the highway, moving slowly through the oaks and the buckbrush of the first ravine. There was a game trail that I knew the deer herds were using to move between the ravines. The trail was a foot wide and already filled with tracks, and I looked closely at all of them, and most were small. They were likely yearlings. 2 sets appeared to be a large doe or maybe a buck. All of the tracks were fresh. Within 15 minutes, I was moving down the ravine in which Jack Standfast used to live. The old rock foundation of his house was still there, standing a foot higher than the ground around it. Dad says that some of his neighbors used to set up their hogs to feed on the abundance of acorns in Jack's ravine. I believe it's those acorns that draw the deer to the area as well. My stand was 15 feet up and attached to an old oak tree near the edge of the hollow. It gave me a good view of the forested creek bottom to my right and the open, reseeded native prairie to my left. The game cameras that I set up told me that a monster buck that I had been watching was coming through this area, and I was in a likely position to intercept it. He was an irregular buck with 7 points on the right and 6 on the left. The 7th point on the right was a drop tine. I swept across the area with my binoculars from right to left, and I caught a fleeting movement on my left at the edge of the draw. It was too quick to determine what sort of animal it was. Seconds later, a loud gunshot rang out. It was of a caliber not generally used for deer hunting. Normally, hunters in the area don't use anything larger than a .308, but this sounded bigger. Something like a .338 Magnum I used for elk hunting out west. Hearing such a report was odd to me, so I watched to the north. And 2 more shots rang out. It was 30 minutes into the season, and those were the only shots I heard. Normally, I would have heard a cacophony of shots as hunters began firing on deer as soon as they began moving in the morning. A few seconds later, I saw a man running through the draw 150 yards east of where I was sitting. He looked like he was wearing a ghillie suit. He wasn't wearing any orange, so I hollered at him to start making noise and announce himself. Wearing orange is a requirement in South Dakota that saves lives every year. I didn't want him getting shot. Not all hunters think first and shoot second. The man didn't slow down or appear to hear me. He ran faster through the trees than I believed anyone could, and this was with a limp in his gait. It looked like he was dragging his left leg. I was so focused on the strange man to my east that I didn't see the man walking in from the north. He was also not wearing blaze orange, but he was carrying a shotgun. I decided to talk to him about the safety issue that he was presenting to himself and to let him know about the other man in the ghillie suit. I thought maybe they knew each other, but it was better to be safe than sorry. I climbed down the ladder and announced myself. "Sir, I'm a hunter and I'm armed," I called out. "I want to talk to you a minute." "Well, thanks for announcing yourself," said a southern accent. "Have you seen anything strange come by here?" I told him about the man in the ghillie suit that I saw run through the creek bottom. He told me that was who he was following. I happened to notice his rifle barrel. He was standing close to me and it said .460 Weatherby Magnum. "That's a big rifle for deer hunting," I said. "Makes my .65 Creedmoor look like a pea shooter." "I'm not hunting deer," he said. "If you want to stay safe, you should be wearing orange and keep the other hunters from shooting you," I told him. "Well, I can't do that," he replied. "Well, what are you doing out here anyway?" I asked. "You're not hunting and you're toting a .460 mag not a week after a murder just north of here?" "I'm finding the killer," he quipped, and then added, "I need to get moving." I stepped in his way as someone called out, "Steve, let's go. The trail leads south." "Steve, if you're hunting the killer, you'll need a tracker and someone who knows the hollow to boot. I'm both of those, and the boy who was killed was a neighbor and a friend of mine," I said. "We got this," Steve said. "I don't want to ruin your hunt." I decided it was best to step out of his way and let him continue his hunt. I heard him say, "Let's go, Lewis." As I stood at the base of my tree and watched the man walking away, I decided I wasn't going to allow these 2 individuals to search for the killer alone. If the man in the ghillie suit was the murderer, I would feel far better seeing his capture or demise. I stripped off my blaze orange vest and stuffed it into my pack. Everything else I was wearing was perfect for stalking. I allowed Steve to get out in front of me a good bit. He and his friend moved rather quickly to the south, and I moved to the trail which the ghillie suit man used. I knew they would fare far better with me tracking him. When I found the trail, I didn't find boot prints. I found barefoot, human-looking prints instead. They were really big as the tracks Dad and I followed during the search. This had to be the killer that we tracked. I followed the track and watched Steve and Lewis move into a ravine, and as I came to the wooded edge, I heard Steve said, "Woo, he's a big one, isn't he, Lewis?" I snuck forward to get eyes on them while staying concealed. Steve was cutting something while Lewis was opening a bag, and then I caught movement of something further past them. It appeared there was something stalking them. It was just below the horizon and staying behind the trees. It looked like another big guy in a ghillie suit crouching to make a move on them. I settled my rifle on a tree branch where I could lean against the trunk, and then I zoomed in tight and I saw the face of a guy to the south. It was ugly and semi-human, but definitely not a real human. I figured it had to be the same ugly thing that Steve had dispatched. I knew the range was 300 yards, maybe a little long. I held the crosshairs directly on the nose of the beast and I squeezed the trigger. It fell forward on its face. "Who is that?" Steve yelled. "One down to your south. Keep your eyes up," I responded. Steve and Lewis went back to back next to the beast lying on the ground. One I didn't see started running in from the west and I hollered, "To the west, one target." It was in front of Steve and he pulled that big 460 Weatherby mag and fired. I could see that a shot went through the shoulder of the beast. Most rifles are sighted to shoot high between 50 and 250 yards. I recognized that the heavy round gets lobbed a touch. "Hold low," I hollered to Steve. He reset himself as the beast was getting closer. It was so fast, and the rifle fired and the beast fell forward, skidding in the snow. I moved quickly with my rifle at the ready, checking 360 degrees with every few steps. And at the same time, I saw Lewis raise his AR and shoot 5 rounds into the beast that I had shot. But once I got close, Steve said, "Thanks for the hand. You don't mind if I take the head from your kill, do you?" "Well, not at all," I said. "What the hell are those things?" "Man, those are squatches," Steve said. "Now you know what killed your neighbor. Nice work, by the way. Do you have military experience?" "I was a Marine," I said. "Do you mean Sasquatch?" I asked. "Yes, sir, that's what it is." Lewis said, "I've had bad experience with some former Marines, but I'm thankful for you." Lewis and Steve told me that they were only tracking 3 of the beasts. They had been watching the infrared footage for several days until the search was called off. My world started spinning. In the last hour, I had gone from hunting therapy to hunter safety officer to seeking vengeance for my neighbor and learning that the legends of the Chihatanka were true. Steve and Lewis beheaded the ugly creatures and made a call to someone to dispose of the bodies. I asked them if they'd be willing to make sense of all this for me over coffee at my house, and they took me up on the offer. I walked with them to their vehicle, and they gave me a ride to mine, and then they followed me to my house. Now, I'm a bachelor with nothing but cattle, chickens, ducks, and guineas, and 2 bird dogs, so it was just the 3 of us at the kitchen table talking while we drained 2 pots of coffee. I was mesmerized by their stories. My dogs, Noel and Levi, they enjoyed the attention they got from Steve and Lewis. They let me know that the deer will be out of that area for a couple of weeks, so I should hunt somewhere else. I learned that they love crappie fishing, and it just so happened that I had caught my limit of crappie 2 weeks ago at Red Iron Lake. I told them we could go out on the ice since it was 5 inches thick and catch another limit. They declined because they didn't like the idea of walking on top of a lake, so I packed 3 bags of crappie in a cooler and I sent it with them. They told me they would stay in touch and come back to do some crappie fishing someday in Steve's boat. I showed them around the farm after that, and then they went on their way. I haven't told anyone about these events. I had several neighbors ask who was firing that cannon on opening day. The father of the dead boy asked me about it. I told him someone was doing justice, but not to tell anybody. He hasn't said anything else about it to me. The following weekend was Thanksgiving, and I tagged out. It was the irregular buck I had been tracking in the hollow, but I found him 8 miles to the south of my uncle's property, nowhere near the area I had tracked him with the game cameras. I have Steve and Lewis to thank for advising me to look elsewhere. I'll be scouting the best crappie areas for Steve and Lewis for saltwater fishing this season. It's a Steve Lilly story. I knew this before I started reading this, and this was good. I love this fan fiction that people write about Steve Lilly. By the way, I'm almost done with Steve Lilly 16. It's quite long. It's going to be, that thing may be 3 hours long. I'm not sure, but I'm really, I'm just taking my time and trying to do a good job on this number 16. I'm trying to act like a real writer. That's what it is. But I appreciate this gentleman writing the fan fiction of Steve Lilly. What a compliment to a character that I dreamed up in my head that so many people enjoy. And he did a good job. He wrote a great story. It was exciting. I was getting pumped up as I was reading it. So thanks to the writer. It was great. Okay, there's two stories that I read to you. Now, what we're going to do is I went to the Woodwalkers meet and greet in LBL a couple of weeks ago. Actually, it was last weekend. And had a great time and made some new friends and met some really nice people. But there were 3 or 4 people, well, let's see, 2, maybe 3 people who I talked them into letting me put a mic on them, and I recorded their encounter. So you're going to hear 3 encounters, I think it's 3, of people telling their own story. And I think these are fascinating. These are really good. And then Neoma Finn, my good friend Neoma Finn, she was there. She told a couple of campfire stories that were spectacular. So I'm going to include those too. So this video's not ending. I don't know how long it's going to be after this, but it's really good. Y'all hang on and listen to these stories by these people. Now, for the Bigfoot nuts out there, these 2 stories that Neoma tells, they are legend. They're legend stories, so they may or may not be true. So nobody accuses me of trying to sneak fiction in as true. Some people have a bug up their butt about that. So I want to let you know that. And then the last thing I want to say before we get started in these campfire stories is that the reason I've been gone from, you haven't seen a podcast in a couple of weeks, is because I'm recording Blood Eagle. I'm trying to finish it up and do the editing. So I'm hoping in about a week, maybe 7 or 8 days, I should have Blood Eagle done. No, it may be a little longer than that. Probably because I'm going crappie fishing this weekend. I'm going to be gone for 4 days. So it may take a couple more days than 10 days, but I've really got this thing cornered up. I've got most of it recorded. I've got about half of it edited. So we're going to have another 5 or 6, 7 hour audiobook coming out. It's Operation Blood Eagle. It's a wild hunt novel by D.A. Roberts. And y'all are going to get a kick out of my German accents. There's a lot of German soldiers and there's German influence in the story. And I try to do a German accent along with do some Spanish accents and stuff like that. So you can listen to it and probably get a kick out of it. But I don't care. I ain't afraid to do this stuff. I ain't afraid to try to be creative. That's just who I am. I'm a creative soul. That's who I am. You'll either get a kick out of it or you'll say, it's pretty good. I don't think it's very good. But anyway, I just thought I'd give you a heads up. All right, now, let's go to these campfire stories, and I hope y'all can do that. There won't be an extra or anything. There'll be an end screen at the end of the video. And if you want to hear more of my stories, you can just click that video. How about that? All right, thank y'all for watching, and I hope you enjoy these campfire stories.
So me and my buddy was riding around one night, just a summer night. I don't know the exact month or anything like that. I know it was warm outside because there was like weeds and stuff on the side of the road and stuff like that. So they'd gotten kind of high on this road, the weeds did. So we're riding around, and the road we were on is called New Lake Road. And there's a new lake and an old lake in the town that I live in. And we're on the side where the dam is, and it goes up and kind of makes a S-curve switchback, kind of like you'll wreck if you're going too fast. So we were coming around there. Of course, we're not going, probably 30 miles an hour. Well, we come around and the headlights are panning around this way to the right. And in the middle of the road, there's this, what it looks like from where we are is a black dog just sitting in the middle of the road. And if you're driving, it's looking that way, like across the road, just sitting there at like attention or something, it's got its ears turned to the road, and it's like full attention is across the road. And then as we're getting closer, I'm thinking, my friend's slowing down, and nothing's kind of raised alarm yet. And he starts slowing down, and the dog turns and looks at us. But I noticed when it looked at us, there's no eyes. There was no eyes. You can see the skin in the skull, in the eye sockets, and it's slick black hair, slick. And it looked at us, and then it looked back across the road, and it took about 2.5, 3 little trotting steps and jumped. And when it hit the high grass, it just turned to smoke. Like it's half its body was still out of the grass, I guess you'd say. And it turned to smoke. And I didn't believe what I was like. That's crazy. And then my friend was like, "Did you just see that?" And I was like, "Well, what did you see? Because I'm not gonna like call myself crazy." And he was like, "That dog just turned to smoke." And I'm like, "Yeah, then we pretty much got the same what we saw then." So we hauled out of there, and it's just it was crazy. I don't know how to explain it.
How big was it?
If I had to guess, it would probably, when it was sitting down on its butt, on its rear end, it probably come up a little bit above an average man's knee, if I had to guess. And when it stood up, it was probably a good medium-sized dog, 35 to 45-ish pounds maybe, in between there somewhere. It wasn't real big, wasn't muscled up, it just looked like like an average house dog. And it was, I don't even know what to say it could be, because it's.
Well, did you dig into it to ask around?
No, not really. I had a buddy that I worked with, and he had some Native American in him. I don't know what, exactly, but he was like, "I don't really want to talk about that." And I was like, okay. So I just kind of left it alone. I didn't really want to know what it was a little bit.
It's almost like he knew.
Yeah, I would guess.
Oh, okay. Whoa.
And the first time I've really talked about it was on I don't remember what show it was. I remember I was on a show with Daddy, but I think it was yours? Yeah, Spencer's.
So you're not into the Bigfoot thing and all that stuff?
I wouldn't say I'm not into it. I just don't. I haven't seen anything. I believe it's there.
You and I are the same then.
Yeah. But I'm not going to see. I can't say if anyone tells me what they seen, I'm not going to say, "Oh, that you didn't see that," because who would believe what I just said? So I can't discredit anybody I listen to what you got to say, and you can tell when somebody's honest about what they're saying and what they're. And hell, with that happened to me, I can't really say anybody's full of anything, because I wasn't there, but I could see where there would be something out there. A lot of somethings that we don't know about.
How old were you at the time?
Oh, this was about.
But just the simplicity of
See, I was probably about 19 or 20. It was after high school, because we had graduated, because we weren't in school at the time. And I do remember being out of high school, because I think we had just got off work, actually. And we was just riding around. We weren't drinking. We weren't smoking. We were sober, just talking about, whatever, the world's problems, I guess you'd say. And we was just, I guess, in the right spot at the wrong time, or whatever. But we was actually talking about it the other day. It got brought up. We was all watching a basketball game and sitting around a fire at his house, and he brought it up around some of our friends, because we was talking about kind of Bigfoot and stuff like that, UFOs, and he was like, "What about, you remember that time we saw that?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I don't know, it's just kind of something I don't really talk about, because I know when people hear it, they're like, people that ain't never seen anything, never been in the woods, never, they don't have family members that have told them stories about, stuff that I didn't discovered and stuff like that. So I just feel like I'd be beating a dead horse or whatever if I was telling the story.
Well, according to what you've seen, how would you measure it with your dogs and hunting?
It was probably in between Honey and my the long-eared dog over there, Clover.
Okay.
It's probably in between that size. Not, yeah, I wouldn't say any bigger than. It definitely wasn't as big as my German Shepherd, but it was about the size of in between Honey and my other one.
But it was jet black. You said it had kind of an oil.
It was slick. It was. I actually found a dog
Like
that
no hair slick or just
thin, like almost like Honey's hair, honestly, but just jet black.
I got you.
And just, you know, the light was shining off of it, and as we're getting closer, I'm like looking at it, and I got a good look at it. He was like, I asked him, and he was paying attention more to the car and the road, and if he was gonna have to turn and stuff. He saw everything I saw, but just not. He don't remember everything, but I got a really good look, because when it jumped across the road, it was a good 10 yards in front of us, and took about, like I said, 2.5, 3 little trot steps and jumped. And when its head and front legs hit the grass, it was like I don't know how to explain it. Like you set a black smoke bomb down, and a black gray, charcoaly gray, black, yeah.
Would you say it kind of had the profile of your German Shepherd?
I actually,
Erect
yeah,
ears?
the erect ears and that kind of stature. But I found a dog online. It's some kind of Egyptian short-haired dog that it actually looked a lot like. I think I actually sent the picture to you, Spencer, of when we were talking about it. I can't remember, but yeah, it was about that's as close as I found. I can't remember what kind of breed that dog was, but
this is a true story. Can you hear me now? Everybody? This is a true story. It happened to me when we used to live up on the hill behind our old school. It's torn down in the small town that we live in. And I was between like 4.5 and 5 years old, because I started school when I was 5. And I still remember it just like it was yesterday, you know. I would be lying in the bed asleep, and something would wake me up. Every night we lived in that house. Something would wake me up every night. It appeared to be about a little over a foot tall, had a jester suit on, and it would just run from the corner to corner, just with a hysterical laugh, and just terrorize me every night. I would run down the hallway. I could see it follow me down the hallway to my mom and dad's bedroom, and I'd be lying there between them, and it would do the same things. Just hysterical laughter, just terrorizing me. And it did that the whole time that we lived in that house. And in 1985, Stephen King put a book out, Cat's Eye. Has anybody ever seen that book, that movie?
Which one?
The Cat's Eye, Stephen King. The little girl, Drew Barrymore is the star in it, and that little thing comes out of the wall. That was what I saw. 25 years before that movie came out, and everybody in my family knows about it, that it's true. I just thought it was real. When I first saw that movie, it was like, you know, apparently he had seen the same thing, I think. I think he saw a lot of this stuff that he wrote books about. But it's not that long a story, but it was terrifying to me.
All right, just hold that in your line.
Okay.
You're recording now.
All right.
I'm gonna edit all this chatter and stuff won't be in.
Okay. I was born and raised 11 years old, 1972. My grandfather had taken me and a friend of mine down to Oakwood Bottoms. We come from southern Illinois, which would be Murfreesboro. Oakwood Bottoms is probably 12 miles away from that, and it's about another 5 to the Mississippi River. The Big Muddy River runs right through or right around town. My grandfather took me down there to go hunting that morning. Everybody in that part of the world, I was brought up poor, so you got one gun. So I had a 12-gauge shotgun. Got up early in that morning. Grandpa took us down there, dropped us off. That time of the year, which would be in August, the end of August, you took sulfur tablets back in the days, keep the chiggers away, keep everything else off of you. You could roll around on the ground, it really wouldn't matter. So he dropped me and my buddy off. We went back in the bottoms. I was waiting for the sun to come up, and the squirrels were up there running around in the tree. And I shot 2 of them out of the tree. I just thought I'd just sit there because, their body will cool off, and normally the fleas and stuff like that would be gone. Within 30, 40 minutes, it kicked back off again. And I was shooting a 12 gauge with number 6 shot. And then I'd been sitting there for a while, and I heard a tree fall. Didn't think a whole lot about it. There's no wind in that part of the world normally. So I'd left the squirrels just laying there. This thing come from the backwoods. And he was looking at me and he was looking at my squirrels. And he started pacing back in between the trees. 11 years old, you really don't know what to do with that. And I was like, I have 3 shots in this gun, and ain't nothing gonna hurt this thing right here. So I was like, you know what? You want these squirrels, you can have these squirrels. It's not a biggie.
And you're just sitting there watching.
I'm sitting at the bottom of an oak tree sitting there watching.
Did he know you were there?
Yes, he did know I was there, and he was not happy about it.
Okay.
So,
Try not to interrupt.
yeah, that's fine. That's fine. He's pacing back and forth. And I was like, okay, I'm going to back my way out of here. So I got up, sitting there looking at me. I start working my way back to the levee. I get to the levee and I just sit there. 11 years old, you don't know what to do with that. And my buddy comes up. I'm trying to tell him what's going on. Grandpa's supposed to meet us there at 10 o'clock. He shows up. And we go home, and he's like, you ain't talking much. I said, I don't have a lot to say right now. We get home, drop off my buddy, and I tell my grandfather about it. I told him what had happened. He didn't question what I was telling him. Because I remember my grandfather back years before that had told me that anytime you enter the woods, there's something watching you.
Where you go in such a hurry?
And that kind of sit on me. I was like, I don't understand what he's trying to tell me. So probably he was a knower and not a believer. So the next day, well, let me go back. He said, I want you to meet me up here at the house in the morning at 6 o'clock. Okay. So I met him up there. He said, bring your hunting stuff. Okay. He took me back down there, dropped me off at the exact same place. He said, go on out there in them woods, do your squirrel hunting, and I'll be here when you come back. So I went out, did my squirrel hunting, shot a couple, come back up. What he told me whenever I got to the car was, you don't ever let anything run you out of the woods that you enjoy that much. So even to this day, like this morning, I'm packing my car up in the dark. And that's a whole different experience. You don't get over that. I had a friend that lives up on the mountain over there from me last year. He called me up at 2 in the morning. He said, something's up here. He said, hit the side of the house. And they just built this house. So we went back up the hill, got on my four-wheeler, grabbed my guns, went up the hill. Went and looked at it, and something had grabbed a tree limb and hit the side of his house with it. And it ain't like it dropped off out of the forest, because there's a roof there and the overhang.
This is the same area.
No, this is actually since I moved to Tennessee.
Okay.
And so I said, well, there ain't nothing in this forest that I know of that can grab a tree limb and beat your house with it 8 foot high. Right down the road from me is a old man that was born and raised in that hollow. He's 80 years old, and he's a preacher. I said, we're going to find out answers tomorrow, but we're going to have to go down there and talk to him. And we went down and talked to him and asked him and said, Told him what had happened at the house the night before. And he goes, it happens. I said, you've lived here 80 years and it happens. He goes, and that's where I'm going to end this story.
Okay. Are you guys all familiar with Montgomery Bell State Park in Tennessee? Okay, so I'm sure you've heard about Werewolf Springs. Well, let me tell you about the legend of Werewolf Springs. Back in the late 1800s, there was a farmer, and he was headed home. I think he was headed from Burns to somewhere over by Nashville. And he was going by way of wagon, and he had his servant with him. And considering the time frame, the servant was probably a former slave, but nobody has ever confirmed that for me. I just know that the man was in the wagon, and it was getting late at night, and they were headed east. And as they were going along, they began to notice that there was something in the woods around them that sounded like it was following them. Well, being late at night, they thought they were being tracked by bandits, and they began to get worried. Well, they're in a wagon being pulled by a horse, so of course they speed the horse up a little bit. But whatever's walking in the woods beside them starts running a little bit, and it's keeping up with them. So they go a little bit faster. And the faster they go, the more this thing keeps up with them, and they realize that whatever it is that's following them can't be human because it's moving as fast as this horse is, and there's no way a human being could be running through the woods that fast. They get so panicked and so scared that the farmer suddenly jumps off the wagon this way, and the servant jumps off the wagon that way, and the farmer rolls in under the bushes, but whatever was following them went with the servant. And the farmer laid there and listened while the servant was torn to pieces by a creature he could not identify. It was growling and screaming, and the servant was begging, God, help me, I can't take this, help me, please. But it tore him to pieces, and he begged for mercy. He wanted desperately to get away from this thing, but he couldn't, and it was ripping at him. And the farmer could hear the bones crunching, and he could hear the cries of his servant. There was nothing he could do to save the guy until finally, with a horrible crunching sound, the servant breathed his last. And the farmer, he sat there, and he laid there under the bushes until dawn. He was too afraid to move. He was afraid if he got out and tried to run, whatever this thing that had killed his servant was going to come after him. So he laid there, and finally the sun came up, and he got up the nerve, and he ran as fast as he could back to town. And he told everybody, something's killed my servant. I don't know what it was, but it tore him to pieces, and I heard it, and I can't find anything, and I don't know what to do. So all the townspeople come out. They search the whole area. They can't find hide nor hair of the servant. Nothing. No shreds of clothes. Nothing. It's just gone. Well, time passes, and more people start reporting hearing things in the woods until finally a group of the townspeople, and I believe it's people around Burns, but it may have been Dixon or something. It's one of those towns in that area. They decided they were going to get together and they were going to form a posse. Now, if you're familiar with Montgomery Bell State Park, at the southern tip of it, it used to be a farm called the Hall Farm. And there's a spring there. And it's just it's not much bigger than that bonfire. It's just a little hole in the ground. And they decide there's a clearing by the spring, and they're going to gather there because that's pretty close to where the farmer had his incident. And they all decide they bring a goat out there, and they stake a goat there in the clearing, and they all get in the woods around the clearing, and they got their guns, and they douse their lanterns, and they sit there and they wait. Now it's a kind of a cloudy night, and the clouds drift across the moon, and things go kind of dark. And then, of course, they drift out, and it gets a little brighter, and they can see the goat. And then the clouds come across the moon, and it gets dark. And then the clouds drift away, and they can see the goat, and the goat's starting to pull at the stake. And then the clouds come across the moon, and it gets dark, and they can hear the goat. And then when it clears up again, they can see the goat, and the goat's definitely panicking, and it's pulling, and it's trying to get away. And suddenly this giant, hairy, two-legged beast of a thing, jumps into the clearing and grabs the goat. And all of the farmers, all of the townspeople stand up and they start shooting at this thing. Every one of them, they emptied all of their rifles into this thing. In the meantime, clouds cover the moon again. Everything goes dark. Somebody gets a lantern lit and they hold it up, and the thing is gone. The goat is gone, and 3 of the men in the posse are gone, and they're never seen again. Well, word got out about this. People didn't know, what is this? People are talking about it. They're talking about it in New York and in California. There's some kind of a monster, and people are describing this thing like it's a werewolf. This big game hunter hears about it, and he decides, well, there's nothing I can't kill. I've been to Africa, and I've shot elephants, and I've shot lions and tigers in India, and I can do any of this. This is nothing for me. So he comes there, and there's a cabin there on the Hall farm, not far from the clearing, or from the spring, and it's got a clear view of that clearing, and he rents the cabin for a week. Now, for the first several days, he goes out and he tracks during the day, and he doesn't really see anything. But, he sits there on the front and looking out the front window at night, and he doesn't see anything go by, but he keeps looking. He keeps thinking something's going to show up. And lo and behold, after about 4 or 5 days, he's sitting there one evening looking out the window, and this tall, walking on 2 legs, hairy creature walks into the clearing. The big game hunter, he's like, well, this is obviously it. This is something I've never seen before. It's got to be it. He pulls up his rifle, takes aim, fires. Dead shot. Now, you'd think it would have dropped it because this guy's shooting with a big old, elephant rifle. But it didn't. All it did was serve to make this thing angry. And it comes charging at the cabin. And the big game hunter, he's trapped in the cabin, so all he can do is climb up into the rafters. And he gets as high up in the rafters as he can, and this thing tears down the door, and it comes inside. And for the whole night, this guy's trapped up in the rafters, and this thing's circling under him, and it's reaching up, and it's trying to grab him, and it's growling, and it's hissing at him. And it's the most horrible looking thing he's ever seen in his life. And he's terrified, and every now and then he gets just the right angle and he fires, but it doesn't affect this thing. Whatever this thing is, he can't kill it. And he's terrified, and he gets down to those last 2 bullets, and he knows he's going to shoot one more time, and if he can't kill it, the last bullet is for himself. So he takes aim, and he's getting ready to make that final shot at the beast. And about that time, the sun pops up over the horizon. The beast looks out the window, looks up at him, and it turns and runs out the door. And it's never seen again by the big game hunter. He immediately climbs down out of the rafters, packs up his stuff, and he leaves. He says, I found something I can't kill, and this is it. Well, of course, this is the story of the werewolf of Werewolf Springs. Interestingly, there was a little girl before Montgomery Bell became a park that lived in the Hall farmstead. She had been sent out to the spring to get a bucket of water, and she never came back. After a couple hours, all they found was the bucket by the spring. If you're familiar with the park, there are 3 lakes there. It's a really nice park. We're not talking, it's not wood like this. It's not rugged terrain at all. It's really well manicured. It's beautiful. They've got a golf course. They've got 3 nice lakes with a swimming beach, and there's a really nice convention center there. It's not anything like what you would expect something like that to be, but to this day, people report while walking in the southern part of that particular park, hearing growling and feeling like they've been being tracked by something, and they don't know what it is. On the westernmost side of the southernmost lake, there's a ridge with caves. And back before it was a park, sometimes the farmers would take dead animals, dead livestock up there in the caves where it could die and rot, or not die, but be dead and rot without having to smell the rotting carcass. And so when they went exploring up there, they found bones of large animals, as you would expect. But what they couldn't explain were the human skeletal remains inside those caves. And that, my friends, is the story of the werewolf of Werewolf Springs.
I wish I could tell a story like that.
Sorry about the background noise.
Has anybody ever heard of the Moss Mountain Massacre? No. Anybody here from Arkansas? Anybody? Anybody know where Conway, Arkansas is? Okay, it's just not too far from Little Rock. And the Arkansas River runs right through there. And there's a little island in the middle of the river that is called Beaver Dam Island. And there is, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of P. Allen Smith. He's a landscape and horticulturist expert who he used to have, and I don't know if he still does, but he used to have a channel or a show on PBS. He owns the plantation that runs alongside that. And I was looking for something to do for Halloween one year, and I found the story about that every year he hosts a Halloween party to celebrate the ghosts of Beaver Dam Island. And of course that made me have to ask, well, what happened on the island? So let me tell you. Back in 1819, there was a man named Thomas Nuttall. Now Nuttall is, if you know anything about birds, you may have heard of the Nuttall woodpecker. That bird is named after him. He was born in England in the late 1700s, I had to be late 1700s. He was raised and apprenticed as a printer in England, and he got all done with his apprenticeship and was ready to become a printer, and he realized that that was not what he wanted. He wanted a life of adventure. So he got on a boat and he came across the pond, and he landed in Philadelphia, where he made friends with America's foremost botanist. And he didn't, I can't think of the guy's name. I want to say it was Smith something, but he didn't have formal training, but he had a lot of knowledge about plants and animals and a serious need for adventure. And so this botanist sent him out and he said, go explore North America, collect unknown plant species and unknown animal species, bring them back to us, let us examine them, let us catalog them, and let's get a really good book of the flora and fauna of North America. So they all come, or he goes out, and he went out on his first expedition, I believe was with Lewis and Clark, or Marquette and Joliet. I can never keep the two apart. And they go out on an expedition, and he sends all of his stuff back, and he becomes very well known. But in 1812, there was a little war between us and England, and he was still a little too British, and he really didn't want to get conscripted by accident, so he went back to England. And of course, we had our little war, and in 1815, he came back. And right away, they said, you need to go back out and you need to start collecting all this fauna and flora. Now, I want you to understand, this man, single, by himself, tracked all across Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, the Virginias, which would have been just Virginia then, all by himself, collecting these specimens and sending them back to the University of Pennsylvania to have all of this stuff cataloged. He was not a squeamish guy. But in 1815, we had just fought a war with England, and we didn't have a real high opinion of the British. Because a lot of you may not know this, but we kind of lost that war. In addition to which, the areas that he was about to go explore, which would have been Kentucky, Tennessee, down through the Louisiana Purchase, there were a lot of French settlers, and England had just finished the Napoleonic Wars. So the French people didn't really have a high opinion of the British. So when this man is asked to get on a flatboat and go down the Ohio River with a crew of men, none of them really liked this Thomas Nuttall. They thought he was a little bit of a a prissy boy. And they weren't very nice to him, and he wasn't very nice to the French. But what he was very, very good at communicating with the native people of the area. In fact, he had a great relationship with almost every tribe he came through. Now, there were those that they'd get to and they weren't very good. They would have arguments, or they didn't get along. But most of them he was able to really develop a good relationship with. Even so, by 1819, when they got to the Arkansas River and started up, he had to still be careful because every tribe was new and he didn't know how they were going to react. And on top of that, as they were coming down the Mississippi, right before they started up the Arkansas River, they were all hit by malaria. So these guys are all sick. They're not feeling really their best. They're headed up the Arkansas River, and they're not sure if they're going to meet friendly people. They're not real thrilled with this prissy guy that's on the boat complaining about every French person he runs into, and how dare he because he's this prissy British guy, and things are falling apart. They get to Beaver Dam Island, and they camp there on the island for the night, October 31st, 1819. Because they're sick, some of the people who are sicker are closer to the middle by the fire. Because they're not sure of how the natives are going to react to them, those people are sleeping kind of out. They're all spread out over this island. Some of them are kind of tucked under the underbrush, and they're scattered all over the island. They all fall asleep, October 31st, 1819. Thomas Nuttall wakes up to a horrific, "Ah!" And he sits up and he looks around, and he realizes that there are these massive two-legged beings, and they are ripping his men to pieces, and he's watching it, and he can't believe he's seeing his men. A man stands up and he's running and screaming, "No, no, no," and he gets his head ripped right off his shoulders, and he's watching this, and he's like, what is happening? Because he knows he can't do anything, he kind of slides back under the underbrush, and he's watching in horror, waiting for his turn to be ripped to pieces. And he passes out because he has malaria and he's not feeling good. Finally, dawn comes the next morning, and he opens his eyes again, and he looks around at the carnage, and this entire 20 or 30 man expedition, they're just body parts at this point. They've all been ripped to shreds. Arms and legs and feet and fingers and toes and eyes and heads. It's everywhere, and there's blood. It's just a huge bloodbath. And he kind of crawls out to the fire, and he's looking around, and he's trying, God, is anybody alive? And one man kind of moans over in the bushes, and he crawls over there, and he kind of shakes him, and the guy looks at him. He says, "You're alive, you're alive." And he says, "Yeah." He says, "What happened?" He says, "I don't know. I opened my eyes, I stood up, I was going to go in and help, and something hit me from behind, and I just woke up. I don't know." He finds another guy, same condition, barely able to speak, battered and beaten beyond belief. 5 men survived that night. 5 men, and at least 3 of them saw a tall, bipedal, hairy beast. Multiples attacked them. They continued on their expedition. They got to Colorado. They turned around, came back. They went to Philadelphia. And the experts said you were attacked by bears. To this day, the attack, the Moss Mountain Massacre, is attributed to bears.